Hello, my name is Ralph Martire, and we're here to talk about why it's so important that you support this fair tax initiative this November when you go to the polls and vote. Before we get into that, I'd like to give you just a touch of background about myself. I'm executive director of a bipartisan organization. It's a think tank that works on good government policy, and in fact, we're committed to ensuring social and economic justice through adequately financed public systems that are designed around best practices. I also happen to be the Rubloff Professor of Public Policy at Roosevelt University, and I teach a master's course on, of all things, tax policy, which brings us to the fair tax. You should understand that your opportunity to go to the polls this November and vote in favor of amending the Illinois state constitution to permit assessing the income tax with a graduated rate structure with some higher tax rates on high levels of income and lower tax rates on lower levels of income is one of the most important things you can do to not only help the state's fiscal system, but to tax people in our state fairly and to ensure some of the long-term problems we see in our communities, like underinvestment in education or over-reliance on property taxes, finally start to get resolved. So what is the amendment? It's really simple. Right now, the Constitution of the state of Illinois prohibits imposing an income tax on a graduated basis. The state has to have one flat rate for its income tax, no matter how high or low your income is. This means a McDonald's worker pays the same tax rate on her income as a millionaire pays on her income. Now, that doesn't even make sense when you think about it, but if you studied tax policy, you'd know it's precisely the wrong thing to do with an income tax. And why is that? Literally, every other tax or fee that supports public services, whether it's a sales tax or an excise tax, those property taxes, or like a driver's license fee, every single one of these items takes a bigger chunk out of the earnings of a low or middle income family than it does from an affluent family's earnings. The only tax that could actually be designed to offset that basic regressivity, that basic unfairness of every other tax and fee imposed by state or local government is the income tax. But then only if it can have a rate structure that shifts tax burden away from the bottom and middle and pushes it to the top by having higher tax rates on higher levels of income and lower tax rates on lower levels of income. Our Constitution prohibits us from doing that. Literally, we're constitutionally prohibited from using the income tax for its express policy purpose. But things get worse. See, the second job of the income tax is to respond to how, income is distributed in the modern economy today. Who is sharing in income growth over time? And here, you might be surprised at how significant income inequality has grown in our state since 1979. In fact, over the last 4 decades, the wealthiest 1% in Illinois, the richest of the rich, have seen their average incomes increase from about $411,000 a year back in 1979 to over $1.4 million today. That's a jump of 254%. It's huge. Meanwhile, everyone else, the bottom 99%, literally everyone else in Illinois, over that same period of time, saw their average incomes go from $51,000 to $61,000. You have this giant growth in income inequality in Illinois, where the vast majority of all economic growth in our state economy is going to the wealthiest of the wealthy. And the only way our tax system could respond to that, not overtax low or middle income working families, but fairly tax all families, is to have an income tax with a graduated rate structure that would impose a higher rate on higher levels of income and a lower rate on lower levels of income. Again, our Constitution prohibits that. But if you vote this November in favor of the proposal to eliminate that restriction in our Constitution, Illinois can finally have the kind of graduated rate structure that works in the modern economy, shifts tax burden away from middle income and low income working families, and puts some tax burden on the wealthiest in Illinois. Now, you don't have to guess what the rate structure will be, because if this amendment passes, we know the legislature, on a bipartisan basis with both Democratic and Republican support, voted for what the new rate structure will be if we ratify the amendment this November. What's that rate structure look like? Pretty good. In fact, the way it's designed, it will raise $3.6 billion in new revenue every year, but only from the richest 3% in Illinois, the very richest 3%. 97% of the people who file an income tax return in Illinois will see their income taxes go down under this proposal. 97%. In fact, we have 6.2 million people in our state that file an income tax return. 3% of that, that's only the richest 189,000 people at the very top. The vast majority of folks in Illinois will get tax relief from this legislation. But the new revenue that's raised will go a long way towards helping Illinois do a better job of funding those core services it's supposed to fund, but frankly can't because its tax policy is not working in the modern economy. What services are those? I'll tell you. The state of Illinois right now spends 96 cents out of every taxpayer dollar, 96 cents out of every dollar on just four things: education, healthcare, social services, and public safety. That's it. That's where our money goes. Unfortunately, Illinois' fiscal problems are so severe, it has this ongoing deficit in its general fund, that it ranks at or near the bottom in funding every one of those core services. And this has been particularly hard for low-income and middle-income communities. Why? Here's what happens. The state of Illinois has so significantly underfunded, let's say, K-12 education, for instance, that most communities can't afford to provide an adequate education to their children. It's only those wealthy communities with a lot of property tax value and a lot of property tax wealth that provide a high-quality education to their kids. The reason that's going on is Illinois' tax revenue isn't growing with the modern economy over time. It's just not. Why isn't it? Every tax and fee it assesses is regressive, focusing on low and middle income families. Over the last 40 years, like I told you, the incomes for low and middle income families after inflation has been flat or declining. The only real growth in our economy is for the richest of the rich. They've seen their incomes explode over this period of time, but our tax system can't respond to it with its flat rate income tax. So this new rate structure, which cuts taxes for 97% of our state and would focus this significant tax increase, but just on the richest 3%, raises revenue our state sorely needs to invest in what it spends its money on: education, health, social services, and public safety. And when it invests more in education, that means local property taxes don't have to cover so much of the bill. And when that happens, two good things occur in communities across Illinois that aren't super affluent. Number one, funding for their schools can go up, and number two, their property tax burden can go down. These are the kinds of things, these are the kinds of problems that get resolved by you going to the polls and voting in favor of amending our Constitution. Now, I know you're going to hear a lot of reasons why you shouldn't do it. In fact, well-financed, wealthy individuals are fighting this because they don't want to pay more in taxes. So they're making up things that really aren't fair or accurate criticisms of the legislation. Let me talk about one. If the fair tax passes, it's more likely for the state to tax retirement income. Nothing could be further from the truth. Currently in Illinois, all retirement income is exempt from the income tax. It's allowed through a deduction. There is nothing in this amendment nor in the new rate structure that have actually passed that create any new power or authority to tax retirement income that does not exist today. It is simply a lie that this initiative, the Fair Tax Initiative, creates any new right or likelihood that retirement income will be taxed. It does not. In fact, AARP, which is a big advocate for retired people, as you all know, is 100% behind the fair tax. 100%. It also opposes ever taxing retirement income. This is merely a fear tactic used to scare people who should vote for the fair tax away from doing so. One other criticism that always comes up that just doesn't fly. If we pass the fair tax, if this amendment gets ratified, it's going to drive people out of the state of Illinois generally and millionaires specifically. Look, there's never been any study that finds a statistically meaningful correlation between people moving out of your state and your tax policy. I mean, so on a very fundamental level, this criticism is off base and can't be verified or justified. But think about what's actually happened in states that have passed millionaires' taxes. California, New Jersey, Minnesota. They bumped up their top tax rates on millionaires. And what happened? They had net growth in millionaires in their states every single year thereafter. It's a fear tactic. It simply is off base. So I'm just going to summarize. The Fair Tax Amendment that you have the opportunity to vote on this November is crucial for helping the state of Illinois both move forward fiscally and finding a way to tax people more fairly. It will raise needed revenue from only the wealthiest 3% in our state who can clearly afford to pay more. It will cut taxes for 97% of the folks who file a tax return in Illinois. And it is sound, good tax policy. We need to make this happen. I hope you will go out and support it. Thank you very much.